Coming to you from the Deep South, this is the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. High-impact leadership is not reserved for leaders, and it has nothing to do with your position, title, or rank. However, it does have everything to do with your character. It's time to climb to the next level and beyond, personally and professionally. Now, let's start making it happen with your host, Mack Story.
Hello, and thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast today. So today I want to talk to you about being born a leader. Sometimes a lot of people ask, are leaders born or are leaders made? And first I'm going to tell you, I've never met an unborn leader. You probably haven't either. And but what we're talking about, remember, leadership is influence. In its most generic, basic form, leadership is influence. Anyone who's influencing another person is leading them, positively or negatively, at an extremely low level or extremely high level, or somewhere in between. So the title of today's podcast is You Were Born a Leader. In other words, you were born a person of influence. And everything that Rhea and I, my wife and I, talk about on our podcast, we write about it in our books when we go speak around the country, sometimes beyond the border, is helping people learn how to be more effective leaders, especially if they're in a formal position of leadership, meaning someone reports to them at work. Definitely want to help those people lead themselves better so that they can lead their team better. What you got to realize, and a lot of people don't realize it, is you got to work on personal growth and development to be a better leader of other people. But a lot of people, they just want to take a shortcut. They want to learn, how do I lead others well? And they want to focus on the others. What do I do with someone? How do I get my team to do this? How do I get my kids to do this? And anyone asking those questions, they have to look in the mirror and realize I don't have the answer. That's why I'm asking the question, which means you need personal growth and development. You got to develop yourself. That's why Rhea and I, we always say the foundation of leadership development is personal growth. That's why you hear me talk so much about personal growth. A lot of people who don't know, they may listen to an episode, and the first episode they hear is really focused about on personal growth. But they may have saw the title of the podcast, Blue Collar Leadership, and they want to go get some leadership training and development. So they're expecting to hear how to lead other people. And I'm telling you, a lot of people don't know that. It's like trying to learn calculus before you learn basic math. You got to learn basic math first, and you got to add some stuff on top of it. You got to add some algebra, some pre-algebra, some geometry, trigonometry, pre-calculus. Then you get to the calculus. And a lot of people miss that. And that's why I'm explaining it to you today. But that's why we focus so much. We're back and forth. We're all over the place, right? If you don't understand, you think, well, sometimes Mac talks about personal growth, how to develop yourself and transform yourself and that sort of thing, lead yourself well, how to become a high-impact individual or a high-impact team player. And then sometimes he's talking about how to be a high-impact leader and how to transform culture. A lot of people can't see it because they don't know enough about it. So I've gotten where I share the little math analogy. So a lot of people can understand about the math. Even if they don't know how to do that higher level math, they've heard of those higher level maths, and they understand they can't do them unless they learn a lot of the lower level math. So that's a little bit about what today's episode is. It's talking on personal growth, personal development, a little bit of that foundation. But the title again of this podcast is You Were Born a Leader. And we're talking about influence is the definition of leadership. Influence is the most generic form of leadership. It's just influence. The instant you left your mother's womb, your natural actions were influencing those around you. It wasn't intentional. It was automatic. It was simply happening because you were here. Any adult can comprehend what I'm saying. What I'm trying to do is help you understand at the most basic level. You were born a leader because you were influencing other people. You even know it. It was just automatic, just because you were here. You were simply trying to survive based on your natural instincts at the moment. You weren't worried about leading somebody or influencing somebody, but you were. Everyone in the room wanted to help you survive. You mattered then, you matter now. But when we talk about leading other people intentionally, growing and developing our leadership, our influence, that's going to determine how much you matter. It's going to determine who you matter to, who wants to follow you, who wants your influence. But when you were born, people you had never met cared about you and helped you get started in this world. Think about those folks. What character traits did they exhibit? Because they all wanted to help you. Pretty powerful. And when Rhea and I are speaking around the country and sometimes beyond the border, and it's especially when it's a smaller group and I'm really focused on personal growth and development, and I'm speaking to people who maybe ain't ever really heard about leadership at all, one thing I want to ask them, and because I want them to process this through their mind, just like I do you during this podcast episode right here. But it's kind of different because I'm not looking at you. I'm not talking to you. I'm not in the room with you. But I'll ask them, if leadership in its most basic form is influence, when did it start? And the people kind of look around. Sometimes they don't really have an answer. Then sometimes people will start saying things. They'll say, when I first meet you, or when I graduated high school, or when I get a job, because they never really thought about it. So they starting to think about it, and some of them start popping out whatever, comes in their mind to start with. And then I start kind of guiding them. Whatever they say, I'm usually saying, could it be before that? Could it be before that? Could it be before that? Whatever they say. Eventually, usually within a couple of minutes, I can get people back to this point I started out with you today on today's episode. People can start to realize when they really start thinking about generic influence, most of them somebody in the crowd can get us back to when I was born. When a person's born, that's when their influence starts. And then I always ask them, could it be before that? And then they really get to struggling. Sometimes they'll figure it out. Most of the time they don't. They're just looking at me like I'm stupid. And then I'll usually ask, are there any mothers in the room? And if there is, and there usually is, she'll pop off real quick. When I found out I was pregnant, that's when someone has influence. When their mother finds out that they're there in the womb, that's when our most generic, basic influence starts. That mother starts to think different, act different. And then I'll say, are there any dads in the room? And then they'll say, when the dad finds out. Right? But the mother usually finds out first. So that's when your true influence begins in the most generic form. So if you want to hear something about that, I actually did a podcast episode back on September the 11th of 2023, episode 352. And I was talking about that part in a little bit more detail, and also talked about the 3 definitions of influence. And then during that podcast, I talked about the definition that I'm usually referring to when I'm speaking. So if you want to dive a little deeper than I'm going in here today, you can go back even farther and learn a little bit more about influence, go check out episode 352. But a lot of the content in that episode and this episode is based on some of the content that comes from my book, Defining Influence. Increasing your influence increases your options is the subtitle. If you want to really dive in deep and get a good understanding of how to grow and develop your influence at home and at work. I highly recommend that book. It's about 250 pages, 19 chapters. It was my first book. I wrote it actually in 2014, and that's when it was released. And it's the book I wish everyone who follows me, who values my content, who reads my books, it's the book I really wish everyone would read. It's got so much foundational content to help people who read the other books actually be better at applying what's in the other books. And remember, I share this all the time. When you read a book, you hear somebody speak, you listen to a podcast, you're not learning what I'm actually teaching you. That sounds a little weird, doesn't it? You're not learning what I'm teaching you. You're only learning about what I'm teaching you. Until you internalize it, you can apply it, you can teach it to others, you can model it, you're living it. Until you're doing all that, you haven't learned it. A lot of people think it's the same way with training. People think, oh, I'll bring Mac and Rhea in, do some training, everything's going to be fine. No, while we're there, people are learning about what we're talking about. Until leaders choose to model it, and leaders doesn't just mean the bosses, should mean the bosses, but it could be anybody. Still, people until people are modeling it, living it, applying it without really even thinking about it, they hadn't learned it yet. But just think, let's go back to when we were born. We started automatically. We had influence then. We had it before then, but with the people in the room, except for the mom and the dad, people who I actually knew about, we were coming. Even then, that's another good example, because when I'm talking about it, I get kind of tangled up because everybody's in the room because they knew you were coming. The people in the hospital, the doctors, the nurses, everybody was there ready. You had influence even in that moment. You could see before you were born, just because people knew you were there. But anyway, let's say now we're born, we're moving on in life, but many people have positively influenced us during various stages of our lives. When possible, we should personally thank them and let them know they made a difference. Each of them influenced us in various ways, helping us become who we are today. We should be grateful they touched our lives. I mean, the guy who really launched me into my growth journey as an adult, I met him once. About 2:00 in the morning in 1995, I was operating a CNC lathe and a big drill, machining some parts on middle of the night on the third shift, and an engineer from our corporate headquarters. I was in Auburn, Alabama, and he was from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he showed up in the middle of the night. I knew he was coming, but I didn't know him, and he was coming to do a time study because I was I was the most effective, most efficient, highest productivity on that sale. That's why they sent him out in the middle of the night. He wanted to know what was different about what I was doing. How was I able to do so much more than everyone else? So they sent him out to do a time study with me. But he expressed belief in me. And he kind of shared some influence from the plant manager at the time, who had never really spoken to me about what this engineer talked to me about. And he was just expressing belief in me as a person. He said he thought I could do more, be more in that organization. He said the plant manager told him, hey, if this guy you going out to study tonight, if he'd go get some education, he'd move up in this organization. And he started talking to me about that. The engineer did, telling me what I could do, what I should do, and all that. I'm like, nah, man, I ain't interested. I was glad to graduate high school. I ain't interested in going back to any other kind of schooling. Funny thing is, though, he loaned me his belief that night. And the next opportunity I had, which was a month or two, whenever the next classes started up at the local community college, I was enrolled and started my journey. All because of that one man's influence. He was leading me as a stranger. Pretty wild, isn't it? So your awareness of self, others, and your environment has been increasing since your birth. It increased the most in your early years. For many people, It seems to slow down dramatically as they reach adulthood. You just kind of start to hang out. A lot of people reach adulthood and they just kind of slow down, start to coast. How much influence do you have with others at this moment? It don't have to stay that way. It can increase. Your influence today is based on the choices you made in the past. Your influence in the future will increase or decrease based on the choices you make today. So choose wisely. Be intentional. Be methodical. And don't stop. Be consistent. Imagine how much potential influence, or leadership is the other word, right? Leadership is influence. Imagine how much potential influence you possess at this moment. How would your life change if your influence with others increased? If you had more influence, could you make more money? If you had more influence, could you have less frustration? If you had more influence, could you have more options? If you got more options, is life going to be better? If you got more influence, is life going to be better? If you got more money, is life going to be better? Everything you want, you need more influence to get it. Now, you're listening to the podcast. You're still listening to this episode. That means you're working on learning the principles that you need to learn how to effectively apply to increase your influence. This episode's really about raising awareness around influence. For some people, they don't even have an awareness of influence. They don't have an awareness that leadership is influence. Influence is leadership. They just think leadership development, training, and all that sort of stuff is for the boss. It is for the boss. It's also for everybody else. To get where you want to be in life, would it be easier with more or less influence? Common sense, right? Everybody knows the answer to that. But also what we know is common sense is not always common practice. It takes a higher level of intellectual capacity, uncommon sense, what I call it, to do what's commonly understood that we should do. Think of the choices you've made. Consider how all of them together have led you to the very spot you are today. Now, things outside of our control happen, but we are where we are today because of our choices, based on the things that have happened in our life. I mean, there's going to be things that happen that's not within our control, and it's going to impact us. But it doesn't determine us. If we're still alive, we still have control. We can still shape and steer our lives in spite of what happens to us. It ain't about what happens to us that's most important. It's about our response to what happens to us that's most important. Our choices are within our control. And yes, there are going to be things that happen in our life that we don't want to happen, but they're going to happen anyway. That's everybody's life, not just yours. That's mine, Ria's, yours, everybody you know. That's life. But it's easy to reflect when something goes wrong and say, if I had only done this or that, things would have turned out differently. Or even if things go right, sometimes things go really good, and you still can say that. If I had only done this or that, things would have turned out differently. In that case, not so good. But you did the right thing, so it turned out good. But you can also do the bad thing and ask the same question. That's how you start to see. You got to develop this self-awareness, personal awareness that your choices determine your direction. You decide where you're going, when you're going, how you're going, who you going with, who you not going with. Our choices matter not only today, but also tomorrow. Here's a quote for you from Dennis Waitley. He says, "A sign of wisdom and maturity is when you come to terms with the realization that your decisions cause your rewards and consequences. You are responsible for your life, and your ultimate success depends on the choices you make." That's good stuff right there from Dennis. You might want to hit rewind, listen to that 2 or 3 times, let it soak in. Especially if you're one of those persons that tends to look out the window and blame the rest of the world for your conditions, your circumstances. Again, bad things can happen. And you can end up in some circumstances you didn't expect to be in. But what you going to do about it? That's what we're talking about. We ain't talking about the stuff you have no control over, because it doesn't matter. You don't have any control of that. Quit worrying about that. Reactive people, they dwell on that. Irresponsible people, they dwell on all the stuff they have no control over. Yeah, but this happened, that happened. Okay, what you gonna do about it? I've had those things happen in my life, bad things. Rhea, if you know her story, she's had some unbelievable bad things. I can't even imagine the things she's had happen to her. And if you don't know, go to riastory.com/TEDx and watch her 7-minute TEDx talk. It's RIASTORY.com/TEDx, like the name Ted, TEDx. You do that and watch what she went through, and you might have went through something worse. I hadn't went through something worse than Rhea has. You may have. Everybody's got a different path to travel. All I'm saying is, whatever's going to happen to us, it's outside of our control. It's going to happen to us. And then we got choices to make. And those choices reveal our character to the world, good or bad. Andy Stanley said it best that a test of character is always a pop quiz. You don't get to prepare. Something happens, who you are is revealed. Something good or bad can happen. Who you are is revealed. But relative to leadership, you may be thinking, what's the big deal with influence? The big deal is, unless you're going to live alone in an isolated place without other people, your influence with others is the key to your ability to live the life you want to live. You need others to help you get what you want. Ain't nobody going to have much by themselves. Somebody's got to pay you for something. That's somebody else. That's not you. Somebody probably had to teach you something. That's somebody else. We all got to have some humility and realize whatever we get in life, we didn't do it alone. You hear people out there, some of these well-off folks saying they're self-made. They ain't self-made. There's thousands of people impacted them in their life. Ain't nobody self-made. You ain't made nothing by yourself. In other words, you think we started this talking about the moment you were born. Imagine if the moment you were born, you just dropped into the middle of the woods someplace. However your life turned out after that moment, that would be based on who you are as a person without anybody else's help in the world. That's a weird way to see it, but some people can't see it for themselves. They can't paint the picture. They don't have an imagination. They don't have an understanding. That's what I'm talking about. Ain't nobody self-made. A human being born on this earth without any kind of support or help from other people ain't gonna make it long. They ain't gonna make nothing. They might make some animals and some critters a good meal. That's about it. So all these people you hear saying they self-made, and I hope you're not one of them. Or if you are, you realize in this moment you ain't self-made. It's a whole lot of people been involved in you being who you are and you accomplishing what you accomplishing. But Zig Ziglar had a great thing to say. He said, if you help enough people get what they want, they'll help you get what you want. That's pretty powerful right there. And that's what I try to do. Not to manipulate, but to motivate. Zig Ziglar had an uncommon way of thinking. He focused on helping others. Guess what I'm doing when I take my time and make these podcasts? This is episode 469. I spend a lot of my time trying to help some other people get what they want. And I ain't here to manipulate them to try to get them to help me get what I want, but it's just a natural result. They may buy some of my books. They may tell somebody about my podcast. It's free. Hey, go listen to this podcast. Then those people might buy some of my books. I've already had people who listen to the podcast, many of them, who have called me up, brought me and Rhea into their organization to speak to their team or to speak at a conference. All kind of ways that other people are helping me, but I'm helping other people because I want to help other people. But helping other people is going to help you get what you want. I write newsletters on LinkedIn. Go check them out. Subscribe. I got hundreds of those. They're free. This right here is free. Got videos on YouTube channel. Those are free. Lots of free stuff. I'm trying to apply that principle in Zig Ziglar's quote. If you help enough people get what they want, they'll help you get what you want. What I'm trying to do is help people have a better life. Too many people simply want others to help them get what they want. That's what a lot of people want. They just want some help. They ain't necessarily wanting to help someone else. But no matter how you see it, you cannot help or be helped without influencing others. In order to help others, they must accept your influence. Or if you want others to help you, you must be able to influence them to want to help you. So here's a simple example to talk about some of this stuff, this influence stuff, to kind of put it in, frame it in a different way that might be a story you tell when you're trying to help someone understand about leadership as influence. Or I hope you get a maybe thought provoking for you and raise your awareness a little bit. Because I what I'm about to share with you, I hear a lot. I've heard a lot in my life. So simple example. Consider you trying to get a new job along with 9 other people. So there's 10 of you guys trying to get a job, 10 applicants for this job. Who's going to be selected? I already know every time. There's 10 people applying for a job. I already know which one of those people going to get the job. You need to understand this so you can be the one. It will be the person with the most influence in these 2 areas. Character, who they are, and competency, what they know. That's what makes up who we are, is our character and our competency. Who we are, what we know. Whoever's got the most influence based on that combination relative to what the person doing the interviewing needs and wants out of a person, whoever that is, that person's going to have the most influence with the one doing the hiring. But I've heard people when jobs, when they don't get a job, and, some people think, well, it's neither of those things you said, Mac. It's who they know. I've heard that so many times in my life when people don't get the job they want. They start making excuses. Well, it's because of who they know. That's why they got the job. Okay. That still validates what I just said, because who they know increased their influence. In other words, the person with the most influence got the job because of who they know. Maybe we need to build relationships with people. Maybe we need to know more people. Maybe we need to have a higher degree of character so other people who may not think much of us start to think a lot of us. That may be determine who we know. See what I'm saying? So let's say it is because of who they know. And I said it already. What determined who they know? Their influence, their character, who they are, and their competency, what they know. Therefore, we got the same answer. Their influence determines who they know. Somebody else may be thinking, I've heard these things. That's why I'm sharing them with you. Nothing new. There's more than the ones I'm sharing. But someone else may be thinking, when we talk about who got the job, who's going to get the job out of the 10? The person they like the most is going to get the job. Well, what determines that? Who they are, their character, and what they know, their competency. That's what's going to determine what the person doing the hiring is going to like. They're going to like the person who feels the need the most. And again, the need is based on character and competency, even if they don't know it, even if you don't know it. Others may say, and I've heard this one a lot too, oh, they select the person with the most education. Maybe, but that's what they know. That's their competency. Sometimes say, well, I can do a better job, but I ain't got a degree. They just hired so-and-so because they had a degree. Well, guess what? If the person doing the hiring wants you to have a degree, guess what you need to have a lot of influence? You need a degree. I shared that story with you earlier about the engineer coming out and believing in me, and I started going to school. And I got a degree in business, and it did exactly what I wanted it to do. It opened a opportunity for me. It provided an opportunity, opened a door. Because as I grew in my career, I had a lot of engineering type experience, although I didn't have an engineering degree. But I have learned a whole lot of stuff about engineering that they ain't going to teach you in college when you get an engineering degree. So eventually, at some point, I applied for a job, and they required an engineering degree. But they waived that requirement because I had so much engineering experience. And I also had a 4-year business degree. But I had to have the 4-year degree. That was a 100% requirement, but it didn't necessarily have to be an engineer degree. That was preferred. So it worked. It increased my influence. If you want a job that requires a degree, guess what you need to do if you want to have more influence? It may not help you do the job any better than what you already know. That was my case. But you got to have a degree if somebody's requiring you to have a degree. Or go start your own business. Or keep waiting for somebody that doesn't require you to have a degree. But how we think and the choices flowing from our thoughts ultimately determine our level of influence with others. Our thoughts become the foundation for our choices. Our choices, all of them, determine whether or not we have influence with others and how much influence we have with them. We first make our choices, then our choices make us. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Think about ordering that defining influence. Increasing your influence increases your options. These books, that book in particular, all of my books really, Ria's books, they're not just made for turning pages. They're made for provoking thought, raising awareness, and you need to mark them up, fold the pages, and turn them into a tool. Don't give them away. Go back and reference them. You ain't gonna read that book and know everything in that book. You ain't going to read that book and apply everything that you learned in that book instantly. Same reason I read some books over and over and over many times over the years. Been reading every day for 17 years. Trying to make as much stick that I can make stick. All right. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Talk to you next time.
Make it happen or someone else will. It might as well be you. Are you serious about taking your career and your life to the next level and beyond? Check out Mack Story's Blue Collar Leadership series books and others, now available on audio, along with paperback and ebooks at Amazon and Audible. Please visit bluecollarleadership.com to learn about Mack's books, programs, special offers, and more. Thank you for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast.